This is Unit 8, Part 4. And now we'll talk about the events associated with digestion within the space of the duodenum itself. As the acidic chyme enters into the duodenum by relaxation of the pyloric sphincter, allowing some of the pasty chyme to move through, carbohydrates and protein in the food have been partially digested by the action of salivary amylase and pepsin and acid and mechanical digestion, but no fat digestion has taken place yet as in that on any of the fat that's in that chyme as it first enters in the small intestine. The chyme is hypertonic and has a low pH. And will be further broken down in the duodenum and absorbed. In fact, almost all nutrient absorption does take place in the small intestine. Very little takes place in the large intestine, although there is significant water absorption in the large intestine. The small intestine is fairly mobile. The most common kind of motility of the small intestine is segmentation, where alternating areas of the gut are contracting to help mix the chyme with the bile and pancreatic digestive juices, and also intestinal digestive juices that are enzymes that are released. And it does somewhat, besides mixing, help move them distally down towards the ileocecal junction, the valve there. Following significant absorption of nutrients, significant hydrolytic enzyme breakdown of the material and absorption of nutrients, increasing peristalsis occurs, and with each wave starting distally and progressing down the length of the small intestine towards ileocecal junction, you get significant motion of material down. And the remaining material that is not digested but is still in the space of the small intestine includes leftovers that from the meal that can't be digested, bacteria, some mucosal cells, some indigestible debris, all get pushed down through the ileocecal junction into the ileum, into the cecum, I'm sorry, the beginning of the large intestine. The circular muscle layer also relaxes so that the ileocecal sphincter at that junction between the ileum of the small intestine and the cecum of the large intestine will relax and allow the chyme-like material to pass into the large intestine. So at this point, the chyme or digested remaining material, I wouldn't call it chyme. I don't think chyme is a good term. Chyme is certainly a good term for the material that is squeezed out of the stomach into the small intestine, but this is remaining material following digestion and absorption. It enters in the large intestine. The large intestine has these fairly unique structures that are characteristic to it, different from the small intestine. It has the tinea coli, which is a long longitudinal band of smooth muscle, 3 bands all along the length of it. It has these ostra or pocket-like sacs arranged all along. And it's the contraction, actually, the background tone or muscle tone contraction of the tinea coli that causes these sacs or enlargements all the way along the large intestine to be present. There are also some appendages hanging off of it, and they are fat-filled. They happen to be called a term which you rarely actually hear, so let's pass it over. The large intestine is divided into several sections, including going distally from proximal to distal, the cecum, right after the ileum. You have the cecum, and hanging off the cecum is the appendix. And then there's the colon, which includes the ascending, transverse, descending, and sigmoid colons, followed by the rectum and anal canal. The sac-like cecum is just below the ileocecal sphincter or valve and has a worm-like appendix hanging off of it. You usually often hear the appendix described as vermiform, from the Latin ver, or verm, or worm. It's worm-like. That's what vermiform means, that it's worm-like. And here you see those structures that I've just mentioned. The small intestine is here, so this is the, well, let me change color. The small intestine is here, entering into the large intestine, so this is the junction here, the ileocecal junction, where you have the ileocecal valve or ileocecal sphincter. There's a blind end pouch hanging off of that, which is the cecum. And then this is the appendix. And the appendix is fairly narrow and is filled with a lot of immune tissue. Then in the opposite direction, not blind end, but continuous, but a continuous structure that leads all the way down to the anal canal, is the colon. The first section is the ascending colon, then the transverse colon going across towards the left. So we're going here on this side is the right side, the appendix is on the lower right. Then going across towards the left side is the transverse colon, and coming down the left side is the descending colon, followed by the sigmoid colon in this area here, the rectum, and the anal canal ending in the anus here. And there are sphincters, both internal and external. You can't see the internal, but they're internal, but there are also, there's an internal and an external anal sphincter in this area. The colon, as I said, has distinct regions: ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon. The sigmoid colon joins with the rectum, and the anal canal is the last section before the anus. The mesentery is, as you should know by now, made from folded over double layer of visceral peritoneum, and is what the organs are hanging off of. So all of the digestive organs in the gut actually are attached to a mesentery. They're all hanging off of that, but it's easiest to see it if you just take a single loop of small intestine and raise it up, and then you can see it most clearly. Okay, omentum is just a term for the fat, like fat structure, the fat material that's within the mesentery. And here you see a diagram that shows a mid-sagittal view of the abdominal cavity, and what I like about this is it clearly shows how the mesentery supports, you know, how the parietal peritoneum is a membrane on the surface of the abdominal cavity, and how it folds in to form the visceral peritoneum, and how all of the internal organs, particularly the most easily seen with the small intestine, are all hanging off of this mesentery membrane. There's more mesentery here. Well, it says it's omentum, but it's also mesentery. So the mesentery is essentially visceral peritoneum folded over. Okay, the large intestine microscopically, the histology of the large intestine is similar to the small intestine. There is a simple columnar epithelium of the mucosa, and that is present all the way down the large intestine and only absent in the anal canal, where the friction of fecal matter is greater, and so it's a stratified squamous epithelium in this area, the anal canal. It has numerous deep crypts lined with many goblet cells secreting, producing mucin, secreting it out. It becomes mucus to help move the fecal matter along the length of the large intestine. As I said in the last section, in the anal canal, it is not simple columnar, but is stratified squamous epithelium. There are sinuses or spaces which exude mucus and help compress the feces in the anal canal. There are also large networks or plexuses just a second, I'm missing a word. There are large networks of vasculature, venous vasculature, associated with the anal canal, and sometimes these can become stretched out and inflamed, at which point they're called hemorrhoids. Here you see a diagram showing the rectum and the anal canal region of the large intestine as it goes towards the end point, the anus here. And as I told you, there is both an internal and an external anal sphincter. Sorry. The internal and external anal sphincters differ in that the internal one is under unconscious, involuntary control, whereas the external one is under voluntary control. And you'll see how that's important, I guess, in the next couple of slides, maybe. Material in the large intestine has a very high bacterial count. There are, in fact, anywhere from 10 to the 8 to 10 to the 10 bacteria per gram of feces. That's a lot of bacteria. So the bacterial flora originates from any bacteria that might have survived going through the stomach and the small intestine, and the few that may have entered through the anus, but most are by swallowing and managing to survive into the through the digestive tract. And then once they get into the large intestine, they're able to colonize and multiply tremendously. After all, it's filled with things that these kinds of bacteria can break down. It's warm, it's wet, it's protected, and it's constantly receiving food. So a place where nutrients are constantly arriving. Bacteria, as I said, they're living there and they've colonized the colon, so they're permanent residents. They are able to ferment indigestible carbohydrates, producing acid and gas. An important aspect is that we get certain vitamins. Vitamin B complex and vitamin K are produced by bacteria in the large intestine, and we absorb and gets absorbed from the space of the large intestine. So they are producing things like vitamin B12, vitamin K. The large intestine is not really involved at all in digestion or absorption of nutrients. The digestion has already occurred in the small intestine. All the nutrients that were going to be absorbed were absorbed in the small intestine. But vitamins, as I just mentioned, produced there by bacteria, will be absorbed in the large intestine. And whatever remaining water is mostly absorbed in the large intestine, and then Also, electrolytes present in that fluid are also absorbed in the large intestine. The major function is compaction and propulsion of fecal matter down towards the anus. And I suppose this is an important concept in that it's not essential for life, but it is essential for normal function, comfort, to have a functioning colon. Although some people do have their colon temporarily, sometimes permanently non-functional. Motility is by contraction of the ostra. The ostral contractions, it's like segmentation that helps to move the contents along. The ostra sequentially contract as they get stimulated by being the stretching of the space as material moves down and fills the empty colon, an empty area of the colon, and stretches it. That triggers contraction. And it also will contribute to initiation, well, not in the large intestine, but any presence of food in the stomach also will trigger peristalsis, peristaltic waves of contraction that move down from the stomach, down through the small intestine, and down into the large intestine, and help move material forward towards the rectum, which is, for the most part, the reason why within a short time of taking a meal, often there's the urge to defecate because the peristaltic action that was triggered by food in the stomach moving material along the large intestine into the anal canal and triggering a sensation of fullness and needing to defecate. Defecation, as I said, is triggered by stretching or distension of the rectal walls in the rectum and in the anal canal. It stimulates contraction of the rectal walls. That's a reflex action. As they get stretched, when they get stretched, they'll contract in a reflex action. And also, I told you about the internal and external anal sphincters. The internal anal sphincter is under unconscious involuntary control and is normally contracted and closed, but when the rectum starts to fill and the anal canal starts to fill, you get relaxation of that internal anal sphincter, at which point the person has to voluntarily contract their external sphincter. Otherwise they defecate in their pants, right? So they're when the rectum and the anal canal are full, you'll get that stretching of the walls and contraction. The internal anal sphincter relaxes and the material could move forward, but the person consciously holds it in by consciously contracting the external anal sphincter. In order to defecate, they have to voluntarily relax the anal sphincter and allow defecation to occur. So what you have is the involuntary anal sphincter, and involuntary muscle is smooth muscle in this case. Smooth muscle is always under involuntary control. It's controlled by remember I told you about the autonomic nervous system, which controls involuntary tissues. The autonomic nervous system. There are two divisions. There's the parasympathetic, and then there is the sympathetic division. The parasympathetic division would allow the internal anal sphincter output or signals from the parasympathetic would allow the internal anal sphincter to relax. Signals coming from the sympathetic division would cause contraction of the internal anal sphincter. The external anal sphincter is under voluntary control. It is skeletal muscle. All of your skeletal muscle throughout your body is under voluntary control. So when the rectum or rectal colon, when the rectum and the anal canal is filled with material, gets distended, you get a reflex contraction and relaxation of the internal anal sphincter because of output from the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, nerve signals coming in, relax it, at which point the person consciously contracts their external anal sphincter until they actually are able to defecate and release it. Then they voluntarily relax it and allow it to open and defecate. And that's the end of Unit 8, Part 4.